Um, so yes, I'm Laura Armstrong. I work at the Centre for E-Research at the University of Auckland. Brian and I have been seconded to a project within the university, which is to develop a research data management framework. So this is a step for the university to take an institutional-wide approach for the first time to manage research data. So I'll get to the next slide. So for us, as I'm sure for many of you, the drivers in this space have evolved quite rapidly over the last few years and have changed quite considerably in the last year even. So at the beginning of last year, the University of Auckland decided to take a strategic view of what were our research data management requirements? What were we currently doing? Where did we want to get to? What did we need to change? So we wrote a paper which was towards an integrated research data management framework, and it highlighted to our executive team the drivers in this space that were pushing us to do something. So we know that the international and domestic funder, publisher, and ethics committee requirements are increasing because we've been talking to them. We knew that we had to respond and engage with Maori better than we were in relation to Maori data sovereignty, but more broadly. We had heard, particularly from the Health Research Council, that they were considering research data management as an increasingly related issue to research impact and how to increase and maximize impact. We also, with late last year, had the change in the Privacy Act. We wanted our community at large to become more aware of fair and care data principles. And really recently, towards the end of last year, we have a new university strategy that articulates our desire to become a Maori data sovereignty organization. Not exactly clear what that means or how we operationalize the Maori data sovereignty principles, but that is a journey that we are now on. And really broadly, we want to treat our research data as a strategic asset to maximize the impact of our research, but also to be able to plan for purchasing the right kind of infrastructure so that it's there when we need it, as opposed to 2 years after the fact. So that project was given a green light. Stock take, if you like, began in August and will carry us through to March this year. So that's the phase we're in. That stock take is not an audit of the research data we have around the institution, because that would be an awful task, but it is a stock take of our current state assessment. You know, what is our maturity with regard to policy, process, platforms, services, and skills across the university? That would lead into where do we want to be as an institution, following through to an options paper where we would talk about the sorts of things we want to achieve in different sort of investment settings. And then ultimately, towards the end of the year, we would have a costed plan to move forward at the beginning of 2022. Bit of a boring slide, but the point of this slide is to show that there are lots of people involved. This is not something that is happening with a few people. We are talking to lots of researchers. We're talking to lots of different stakeholders internally and externally. On the project team, Brian and I are joined by our Associate Director, Research Strategy and Integrity, Nick Cairns, and also most recently by Dr. Tanya Allport from Whakaari Research, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But the leadership of this project is jointly held between an advisory panel that's chaired by Professor Mark Geoghegan and the Māori Data Sovereignty Kāhui that is chaired by Andrew Spool. Both great people in this space whom we have learned a lot from, and we have representatives across the university in those two groups. So lots of people involved. But what is a framework? So first of all, for us, research data, we define it really broadly. It's anything and everything that researchers collect, obtain, create in the course of original research, whether it's maps, annotated bibliographies, samples, test tubes of bits of people, DNA, spreadsheets, costings, government data, whatever, all of that stuff. And we also know and worked quite hard to develop a series of services currently available across the research data lifecycle. So from data management planning template, storage solutions, compute solutions, visualization services, data publishing platform, and around again. But we also know that there are gaps in our offerings. There are problems with how people get to be aware of those, how they access them, are they fit for purpose? And there's a skill gap amongst our community, both the people who are managing research, but also the people who are supporting researchers. So an integrated research data management framework will pull together policy, strategy, governance at one end, through processes, platforms, services, and support and upskilling staff at the other end. So that's what we were hoping for. So I mentioned that we were in a stock take, and stock take is not an audit. So we are spending almost half the project looking at where are we now? What are the services, policy, practices available to research staff at the University of Auckland currently, ahead of being able to figure out, well, where do we want to be and how do we get there? So most of the last 2 months of last year, Brian and I were rushing about over Zoom, or when we could in person, to speak to faculty and school groups. So we did something like 28 different engagement sessions. We targeted those and tweaked those depending on the audience. So for example, this one here, there's a picture of, was very much based at a healthcare audience, and the changes around HDEC that were coming into place, the information we'd got from the Health Research Council to couch research data management in terms they would be find appealing. We did a lot of work to raise awareness about what is fair data principles, but also around Māori data sovereignty. We followed that up with an online survey, and I'm going to talk about the survey and interviews in a second. So the online survey was issued to all researchers, postgraduate research students, and anybody that dealt with research data, whether they were a technician or people like myself in Centre for E-Research, people who were handling data. And this was sent anonymously using Qualtrics survey system. It took about 20 minutes to answer, and that closed at Christmas. We had 283 responses, which I understand to be a similar number to the number of responses we had for our university strategy development. So I think we were pretty pleased with that. The findings we haven't completely crunched yet, but just as a sort of preliminary view, over half of the respondents were from a healthcare biomedical background. So for us, that's a very large part of our community. Also, an outsized amount of data comes from that community. 50% of respondents had done a DMP or more. Most of those DMPs were in response to ethics or a funder requirement. So there's still a big stick drive to do some of this stuff. Lots of researchers might have a structured file naming schema, but they tended not to follow disciplinary metadata standards, and they tended not to use a README document. So people were quite good at organizing for themselves, but less interested, or at least less practices around enabling other people to be able to pick up their data and make sense of it. Sharing still happens predominantly in ways that you might not want it to. So we have a lot of email sharing, a lot of USBs, a lot of portable exchange of data. And the view of long-term stewardship is a complicated one, in the sense that for many, they saw data stewardship as residing with the PI into the future where they were no longer necessarily with a particular project. So that sense of data being left with the institution to govern is something we're going to have to discuss and figure out how the community feels about it and how we would step forward with that. There's lots more, I'm sure, that the survey will reveal. The next stage of that stocktake is to do some deep dive interviews. We are interviewing, I should explain the word visualization first though, sorry. At the end of the survey, we asked people to give us their top 3 priorities for issues. This was a free text field. I haven't gone through and looked at the ranking or the hierarchy, but you can see pretty clearly that storage, platform, infrastructure, you know, the stuff, the boxes, the services people want to use comes out very clearly. But there's all sorts of issues around sensitive data, the need for policy, ethics being a big part of this, security, data security, protective security. Those were all things that are exercising our community. And that flows better to what I was saying. So the next stage is researcher interviews. So we want to do a bit more of a deep dive with 12 to 15 research groups. And we've tried to pick research groups that give us the whole diversity of our community, whether that's people who are running clinical trials or people who are going on to Marae to collect tonga and stories and old video recordings that need digitization, and anything and everything in between. So we're looking to capture current research data practices. What is their awareness? What are the gaps? What are the barriers? What are the enablers across 6 main areas? And those 6 main areas follow our data maturity model, which I'll talk about shortly. So we were interested in policy, Maori data sovereignty, data management practices. So if I've said active data there. So how are people organizing or documenting their data as they collect it, as they work with it, as they analyze it? And then data processes for how they share within their team maybe, but also with collaborators who might use it to do analysis or to reuse it in the future. Infrastructure, and then the support services and skills that our community as a whole has and may need. We've only booked a few of those interviews. They just started next week, actually sit down with people. But what we're doing will be to plot that survey results and that interview results against a maturity model that we are developing. Now, Brian is spearheading this work, so if you see Brian, you are more than welcome to tackle him about that, or he can pipe up if anybody has questions. But we've taken various models that are available internationally. So that's the Carnegie Mellon maturity model, first link there. There's the Our Land and Water, which Mark Geoghegan, our professor and director here, was involved in. The Australian National Data Service Capability Model, and several others. And the one we've got here in the picture is Associate Professor Maui Hudson's work, which I think is ongoing, to operationalize the Māori data sovereignty principles and set and take so similarly mature initial with a lot more detail for each and all the way through to skills and training. That is something we are very happy. It's a little bit less still working on it, but we do wish to share that with the community ready, which we hope will be. So that's our project. I don't know what mix, but one of the things that has been really clear to us is that whatever we deliver will not be a one solution. Want it. So what we're hoping to deliver, so that might be that schools their own policies that fit in with an institutional guiding principles. Researchers, we want things to be increasingly connected, not least so systems, and it will happen over time. I'm sure you are all aware of environment, and we won't get everything we ask for all at once. That whatever you like or here.
All right, thank you very much, Laura.